starting around about sort of 1:45 with Andy kicking us off. So if we can just continue to share details of where you are and your organisation, that will be brilliant. And I will just give a short introduction before we move on to our main sessions. So please do continue sharing. I was just saying it's wonderful really to be able to welcome you all to our 46th meeting of the group. And I've just been looking at the delegates joining today, and it's wonderful to see that some of the original members of what used to be called the Learning and Teaching Experts group are still participating in these meetings and in this community. I'll say a little bit more about how this community has grown over the years and its purpose shortly, but wonderful to see that. And I think in addition, we have over 140 delegates today joining us at various points through the day, and we'll be looking at the recordings. So wonderful as well to be able to open up this group wider, and despite the situation we all find ourselves in at the moment, to really feel part of this wonderful community of practice and to be able to hear some of the really innovative and exciting work that our members are doing across FE and HE. So we do have a mailing list for the group. And if anyone has not joined yet, please do. It's a great way just to keeping in touch with the work we are doing in Jisc around this area, and also gives you the details of our meetings. Now, we usually have 2 face-to-face meetings a year, which take place in Birmingham. Sunny Birmingham normally, and we have some lovely, not virtual cakes, which we'll be having today, but we do have some very nice pastries normally. And as I say, it's that the switch to online has obviously enabled a lot more members to join us today. So as we see, we've got internationals. Lovely to have you with us, Jill, joining from France. So it's great to be able to open up the meeting wider today. So just a little bit about the schedule for today. We will be having lots of breaks through the day, and you are able to pick and mix the sessions that you wish to attend. We will be recording all of them, so they will be available post-meeting, but you have got the opportunity of dipping in and out depending on how your workload is for the day. We are using the Twitter tag of Jisc Experts 20, so if you do tweet, please do follow the Twitter stream on that. We will be sharing an evaluation form because it's really important that we gather your views and feedback, particularly in terms of informing future meetings. And we have got a meeting penciled in for October. Whether that's face-to-face or virtual, we'll have to see, but we'll hopefully be able to continue the discussions that we start today. All the presentations and recordings will be available from our events page. So moving on. Just a little bit of background for those that are new to the group around what we do. Well, the group was originally set up back in 2004 and provides Jisc with a really useful way of informing its developments around the student experience area. The group has been very influential in informing most of the work that we've done in our student experience area and portfolio, from our early research around learners' experience of e-learning through to our work we've done on digital literacy that we've evolved into digital capabilities, some of which you're hearing about today, through to our assessment work, curriculum design. So we've been very, very fortunate, I think, to have the influence and support from this community, and to be able to really ensure that Jisc work does fulfill and meet the requirements of the FE and skills and HE community. So it's really important for us to continue to have this engagement and to ensure that we can engage and feed in your views to the work that we are currently planning and developing. You're also our advocates, and you also we really rely on you to sort of disseminate and cascade the work that we do, to share that with colleagues and really ensure that we're able to get the good work out into the community wider. So you're very much seen as our champions for our student experience work across Jisc. So what are we doing today? Well, today our focus was around assessment and feedback, and the role that technology plays within that. And of course, the agenda was set pre-COVID, and in the current situation, of course, that's really put a spotlight on assessment and feedback and how institutions are having to redesign and respond to the current crisis. So I'm really delighted today that we're going to be hearing from examples of effective practice and innovative practice that's taking place in the sector from both HE and FE, as well as also some visioning work and really looking at what the challenges are and how we can move our understanding and our work forward in the coming years as well. We're also going to be hearing later in the afternoon sessions about some work we're doing around our digital capability area, and in particular, looking at how we can support staff with developing their practices for remote learning and assessment. And we're also going to be then hearing our last session of the day is looking forward and particularly thinking about the challenges that we may be facing in terms of supporting students with online induction in September or face-to-face induction, should things improve, and the work that we've been doing in that space to look at how we can support students with their digital experience and looking at how that can be integrated into induction processes. So we hope that will be some useful information, ideas, opportunities for discussion over those areas. So starting the day, hearing from Andy McGregor, who I'll be handing over to shortly, who'll be introducing Jisc's work around the future of assessment. We'll then, after our virtual coffee break, be moving on to hearing from Rachel Forsyth at the Manchester Metropolitan University, and the work that their team is doing in supporting staff with the use of technology in assessment and feedback. And after lunch, we're delighted to have Steve Smith and Frank McHale from Preston's College talking about how they are supporting staff with their online assessment. And finally, finishing the day with our two sessions around our digital capability work and our digital experience work, hearing from Shri and Claire. And please note there is slightly different emphasis on the session that Shri is going to be running at 2:15. We recognise that in the current situation, we want to use that as a session to surface how you are supporting staff with the development of their digital capabilities for delivery of remote and learning and assessment, rather than the focus we originally had, which was around looking at digital capabilities in the curriculum. So please note a slight difference to that session. So with our student experience meetings, we always like to challenge you and to ask, what one thing would you like to take away from today's meeting? And I hope it's more than one thing. I hope it's lots of ideas, lots of discussion, lots of networking, even if it is virtual. But if you would like to share what one thing you're hoping to take away in the chat window, that would be great. And just while people do that, just a warm welcome to those that have joined. Thank you for posting in your details around your roles, where you're working at the moment, and in some cases what country you are joining us from. Love that. Hope and inspiration, Julian. Wonderful. Love that. I think that's something we all need today. Yes, sharing experiences, and lovely to have you with us, Simon. I was just saying at the start, we've got people that have been here right at the beginning of this group and have been with us on this journey over those years. So great to have you with us today. Stealing ideas, I love that. Love that. Sharing good practice. And I think that's something that we have so valued from this community, that we at Jisc learn so much from hearing about the practice that's happening in our community. Looking at the ideas, the inspirational work you are all doing, and how willing you are to share that. And I think that's something that is very, very unique to our community that we have in FE and HE, and also the cross sharing of ideas as well. Lovely to have you with us, Vicky. Super. Well, please, top tips. Yeah, we all need those. Super. Well, I'm going to be reviewing those as they continue to come in. Please do carry on sharing those. And Mike, just to note, particularly around the VR work, do make sure you participate in the session at 1:30 to hear Steve Smith and Frank McHale's work, because in addition to their use around Canvas for their online assessment, they are also heavily using VR. So that hopefully will be a good opportunity to make some contact with Mike and Steve in that area as well. And likewise, Debbie, thank you. So we've already got some virtual networking happening in there. So before I hand over to Andy, just a few very quick updates from our side in terms of some of the areas of work that I know the community have fed into. Just to give you a quick sneaky peek in terms of our student experience surveys from our digital experience service, we have currently over 33,000 student responses to our current surveys that are open at the moment. Which is, wonderful to see, and we're obviously going to have a very rich set of data that we're going to analyse. Now, we were due to close those surveys on the 1st of May, but with feedback from those that are participating in this year's survey, we are extending the closure date to the 29th of May. So for those of you that are still running surveys, have got them open, have yet to launch, please do use this as an opportunity, because it's a brilliant way of gathering your students' views. We obviously also have our teaching staff and professional services surveys open at the moment as well. And particularly thinking about your local context. So to be able to also customise the questions, the local level questions that you're able to ask to the current situation, so that you're able to really get those actionable insights. So please do go back to your institution. If anyone has any queries, we've got Ruth in the conference today, as well as Claire and myself. So if you have got any queries, do get in touch with us on the insight side. We're in the process, as some of you may know, of analysing our researcher survey pilot data. So from September, we will be able to have a truly holistic view of all staff within our organisations. To include researcher views around their digital experience, which again is a very important audience for us to be engaging, particularly if we are thinking about having that holistic digital strategy across our organisations. A big plug, and I'm delighted to see that that we have already, I think, got over 200 registrations for this event. But we are very pleased to be working with the University of Northampton on our community of practice for our digital experience insights community and our digital capability community of practice. We're hosting the event online. Unfortunately, we're not able to visit the wonderful campus physically, but we'll be doing an online community event on the 21st of May. So if you are interested, focusing down more on these areas of work, please do register for that. And in terms of the insights work, join our community of practice list. Just to flag, and I think it's quite important, obviously, at the situation we're in currently, a lot of feedback we are getting through is about concerns for students and staff's well-being. Now, we've done some work around digital well-being. I know some of you are aware of this work, but if you are looking for useful guidance, useful tips, we have got some excellent briefing papers that were published in November last year, which really do give some practical advice and guidance around supporting the digital well-being of your staff and students. There is also a paper aimed at organisational leaders and thinking about how we address that as an organisational-wide issue. And we have got a separate mailing list and some blog posts, as well as information on our main digital capability website. So if anyone is interested in that, please do make a note of those links there. Thank you, Claire, for putting that in the chat window. And just a plug as well, and just sort of collating all its support for responding to the coronavirus. And if you're not aware, please do have a look at those pages. There's really useful information on there across all of the areas relating to support of infrastructure, security, through to learning and teaching, through to digital resources and content. And there is also a supplementary community group in Microsoft Teams, which has been very active, and again looking at ways in which we can share what works and what support is needed. There's also a great list of curated sector resources, which are really coming together quite nicely now from what everyone is sharing. I don't know if you're like me, and when you look at Twitter, you just can't keep up with all the links and practice that's being shared. So we have a team in Jisc that are collating those links in a central place. And that's a really useful sort of one-stop shop really to go to sort of find out what is happening, who is sharing what resources freely, and where you can find them. So hopefully those are useful information as well for you all. So I'm going to pause there. I'm going to hand over now to Andy McGregor, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that Andy can take control of that. And apologies, no one told me. I was testing this out yesterday, and with Shree, and you haven't mentioned the fact that I'm sitting in a tropical beach behind me as we were trying to test out some of the screen options. So I hope you're enjoying the background. Yes, they're great.
It looks good.
I'll stop my video and I'll hand over to Andy now to take us forward to the next session. Thank you. So can I just check we have Andy with us? Yes, great.
I am.
Handing over to you,
Hello.
Andy.
Hello, everyone. Just a
No
slight
beat.
when I was made a presenter.
No green screen.
No, I'm in the nursery with the stars. We've never bothered to change the wallpaper, so no trickery here, just the plain facts. But I have actually got dressed up and put a shirt on for the first time in 5 weeks. That feels very strange. So thanks, Sarah. I'm delighted to be here with you all today. I'm going to talk to you about the Jisc. Oh, I should introduce myself first. Sorry. So I'm Andy McGregor. I'm Director of EdTech at Jisc. What that means in the real world is that I oversee a team of people whose job it is to think about what Jisc might need to do in the future. So 3 years and beyond. So what new products we might need to come up with, who we might need to work with, how we might need to develop in order to meet the Education 4.0 vision that Jisc has set out. As part of that, recently we've been thinking quite a bit about assessment, and that's what I'll be talking about today. I'll just get up my presentation. That should hopefully be working. Go for the full screen. Yep, hopefully you can all see that. Anyone let me know if you can't. So what I'm going to do today is lead a general discussion, if you all join in, on the future of assessment. This will be acting more as a warm-up session for, I think, the solid tips and guidance you mentioned in the chat earlier that you'll get from the next 2 sessions that follow. Now, the sharp-eyed among you will notice that there's a DigiFest logo on this presentation. That's not because I'm lazy and haven't changed it. It's not just because I'm lazy and haven't changed it. It's because I want to tell the story of how we presented the Future of Assessment report, when it was released, how we presented DigiFest, and perhaps most importantly, what's happened since. So back in February, February the 10th, I think, we released a Future of Assessment report. That was produced by talking to over 50 people from the sector, and I've already seen on the chat at least 3 people we spoke to as part of that report on this call. And the report used those conversations to look at where we might want assessment to be in the next 5 years. So by 2025, where might we want assessment to be? The report talked through a set of principles that underpin those discussions, and then made a series of recommendations for targets we might want to aim for in 5 years' time. So those targets were authentic. So assessments are more closely linked to the skills that students will use in their continuing life. So assessments are more authentically testing skills in authentic environments using the tools and techniques that learners and students will carry on using throughout their life. The assessment will be more accessible, that universal design will be used so that assessments can be delivered in multiple ways depending on individuals' needs. The assessment is appropriately automated. There are plenty of AI tools out there using machine learning to do clever things, some of which are very useful, some of which are slightly more questionable. It's undoubted that some of those will be useful in assessment and in education in general, but it's also important that we recognise that education is fundamentally a human-to-human process, and that's where most of its value comes from. So we have to be careful to automate the right things so we don't lose the value in assessment. That assessment will be continuous assessment will continue to be an important part of the educator's toolkit, and it may even grow. And it's undoubted that data analysis will start to play a bigger part in continuous assessment, that it will help define new forms of continuous assessment, but also that it will be used to assess the effectiveness and impact of continuous assessment while continuous refining. And the final target is more secure assessments. There's a memorable quote in the report about technology leading to an arms race of cheating. Then it's undoubted new forms of technology can always lead to new and creative forms of getting around rules, but technology can also help stop that as well. And we will have to look at new Obviously, one of the most important things about exams is to make sure they are high quality, they are valid, they are fair, and technology, we think, will play a part in that and making sure that those assessments are secure enough for people to rely on. So those are the 5 targets we set out. When we presented it as a DigiFest, what we wanted to do was see what people thought would prevent us from getting to those targets. So we held a pre-mortem in the room. We got everyone to think on the tables, come back with some ideas, then we got people to vote on their ideas. And these are the top reasons people came up with for why we might not meet those targets in 2025. Motivation of staff to make changes, lack of time for staff, systemic conservatism, perceived cost, logistics to change. All of those are probably the same reasons you get if you'd have ran that session any time in the last 5 years. So from 2015 onwards, I would doubt whether that top 5 may change at all. But there's a reason for that. They are massive barriers. Then once we've done that, we had that vote, we then moved on to, okay, so those are the reasons we might not meet those targets. What ideas have we got for other individuals or institutions for how we might go about meeting those targets? And these are the results of the voting from that session. Giving real tangible examples to staff, saying the benefits of staff, senior management buy-in, start small, support innovators, and student militancy, which meant encouraging students to advocate for what they wanted from their assessments. And so that was interesting. Again, maybe you could argue that in the last, if you did run that any time from 2015 to 2020, you would have probably got the same top 5. But again, very good reasons. There's no criticism of the answers because those are the things we absolutely have to address. So DigiFest took place on March the 10th. Since March the 10th, a little thing's happened you may have heard of called the coronavirus, and that has obviously made some fairly big changes to the world of assessment and really throws the answers given in those sessions into stark contrast. So obviously you on the call will be far more aware than us in Jisc over the day-to-day. Oh, one of my headphones fell out there, sorry about that. You'll be far more aware of the day-to-day changes that coronavirus has wrought on assessment and education in general. But we've been listening to Jisc members, and I've given what we learned so far on how assessment has changed. I've just tried to summarise here. The first is that when the Jisc report was released on February the 10th, the Jisc press team did a good job of getting coverage by talking about an end to exams to grab attention for the report and get things in newspapers and so on. That created some discussion, but no one could have predicted that merely, just over a month later, we would have a literal end to exams, and and what that would mean. We've got exams cancelled throughout education. In the evidence we've seen from our members and people we've talked to, it seems that the most common replacement at the moment to exams seems to be open book exams. And those vary in length. Some disciplines or subjects happy to give 24-hour open book exams, some needing much shorter time periods, like 3 hours maybe for maths exams. We've seen that some institutions experimenting with capstone assessments. So that's a single end-of-year assessment which summarises learning across all modules. We've seen quite a lot of people looking to convert exams into coursework. And the final one is we've seen some institutions looking at e-proctoring. Now that is an area fraught with difficulty. I don't know how many of you have seen, but there's an interesting article in the Washington Post about some of the practices involved in e-proctoring, some of the problems with them. So it's undoubtedly an area to be taken seriously and looked at seriously before diving in, but it's something that many people, from what we've heard at least, are seriously looking at. So that's what we've seen about how assessment has changed. What I want to do now for the rest of the session is get you talking, get you giving your input. So what I've got is a series of questions. We've got 7. We'll see how well we do at getting through them. We might not get through all of those in time, or we might finish early. Who knows? It's hard to predict with these kind of online discussions. So I'll ask you the questions. I'll ask you then to type your messages into the chat on Zoom. We'll reflect on the answers as they come in, and then I'll encourage people to raise their hands so that I can give them the mic so that they can reflect on what they're seeing in the chat. So hopefully you've all got your typing fingers ready, you're all ready for a rich discussion online. So I'll flash over to the next question.
Sorry, Andy, just before you do, we've just got a question in the chat that's come up. Could you give a bit of an explanation around e-proctoring?
I can, yes. Sorry, student knowledge there. So thanks for that, Sarah. I didn't have the chat up while I was talking because it gets a bit crowded. So if I've missed anything else there, so if you can just prompt me like that, that would be really helpful. Debbie, that is the article from the Washington Post. You'll also, there, just while I'm on that, before I answer what e-proctoring is, there's also been a petition at the University of Tilburg from students asking for an end to e-proctoring. But the proctoring is essentially invigilating exams using online tools. So traditionally it's done, a student sits down in front of their laptop and the tool will monitor their activity as they take an exam on their laptop. Now the technologies, there's lots of different ranges of technology. Some of them involve someone actually sitting there and watching you while you take the exam, and you're not allowed to leave your laptop till you finish the exam, and which the Washington Post article points out some problems with. Some of them use machine learning, which is obviously one of the things machine learning is very good at, is pictures. So what that does is judge whether there are, if someone sat at the laptop, is it the right person based on the previous profile? Is there more than one person sat in front of the camera? Is there any time when there's someone not in front of the camera? And any time one of those things gets flagged, it gets sent as a flag to a remote human then to intervene to check whether there's a problem there. It can detect things like background noise, it can check suspicious motions, it can check whether you've gone to a different page on your browser to look at something, where you disabled the webcam to go and use a different application on the computer. So it can be a really intrusive technology, and that's what the Washington Post article is turning out. Personally, I think with many things, the technology is not necessarily the problem, it's how it's used and how it's implemented that's the issue here. And there's obviously a lot of thought and thinking that needs to go into this before it's used at a widespread level in the sector, as some of the issues have pointed out. Now, I can see already from the chat, there's, oh yeah, someone says there's a shame there's a paywall on Washington Post. Just go into incognito mode and you'll be able to read it. That generally works for most paywalls on computer, paywalls on many different newspapers. There's obviously people who are far more expert in proctoring on this call, I suspect, judging from the chat. If other people have better definitions, please do just type it into the chat and correct anything I've got wrong. Okay, any other things I need to do, say before we go on to anything? Have a look. Just quickly look at the chat. No, okay, let's go on to the next question, the first question. So, question 1. How have you seen assessment change due to the pandemic? I've given you some examples of how we've seen, we've heard from Jisc members, colleges, universities, how assessment has changed, but how have you seen it change? If you could type your answers into the chat, I'll give you a couple of minutes and we'll start responding to the chats as they go on. And then what I'll do is try and encourage people to come off the mic so you're just not hearing my boring nasal voice for the entire hour. Okay, so we've got to start to see some things coming in here, which is good. So greater adoption of audio, greater adoption, I'm using a chat here, greater adoption of audio feedback tools, which is interesting to see that's come up straight away. I suppose that's obvious when face-to-face is more difficult, so you get in that asynchronous approach to feedback, which is really interesting. More problems in Australia with e-proctoring, but I hadn't seen that one, so that's a good link, so thanks whoever sent that. Move to take-home exams submitted online. So that's is that similar to the open book exams, I wonder, or is that a slightly different take on that? Interesting. Presentations processes move to recorded narration. Seems like an obvious step, but I imagine there's quite a lot of support issues involved in that. Video assignments. Interesting. So actually creation of videos instead of doing presentations. Okay, interesting. So, got take-home exams as distinct from open books there. More electronic submission, greater creativity in submission types. All assessments being rewritten across the university. Most exams become 24-hour books, posters and speaker notes, video conferences, or extensions. Yes, we've seen a lot of that from members as well, how just extension has been one of the first and easiest tools to take forward. Okay, some MCQ normally done on paper now being done online. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Exams to coursework changing as well, 24-hour book. So yeah, so it's lots of similar to the things I mentioned. Okay, anyone got any reflections, anything they want to say? If they do, just raise their hand. Interesting, Mike saying no e-proctoring for us. I wonder if that's a university-wide policy decision already. That would be quite interesting to know about. And just lower numbers taking exams, I think. That's interesting. Yeah, the on the ground innovation was obviously going to be quicker than national awarding bodies can keep up with. I don't know too much about how they're responding. It'd be interesting if anyone knew more about that. Oh, good. Yeah, Sarah's remembered to flag our colleague Andrew Cormack's very good blog post on e-proctoring and how to avoid some of the pitfalls and where the pitfalls may be. Oh, it's interesting from Ruth there. Anyone using postal submissions? That's an interesting question. Something from Sally Brown. Yeah, that's very interesting. Useful to have that link. Interesting. Someone in there saying some external organisations are forcing e-proctoring. Yeah, we're seeing lots of interesting things with e-proctoring. I think some of the suppliers have put up their prices, for example. Some people finding some of the tools aren't fit for purpose and having to change their process at the last minute. I think it's a very interesting area. That's a Mike's response there. So university-wide, move to no e-proctoring. Academic misconduct still applies. More pressure on staff to be vigilant and spot that. I guess that's another thing that staff are feeling the pressure for, I guess. So UCL 3,333, which is a suspiciously regular number, has been adjusted. Wow, that's amazing in such a short period of time. Just shows how hard people are working, how innovative they've been. Okay, I can't. If we've got any hands up or anyone who wants to make a reflection or say anything on via voice. No, not at the moment. Okay, right, good. Lots of interesting stuff there. More than I can respond to in the time without laboriously reading everyone. I'm not sure what one of you want me to do that. So we'll move on to question 2. So that's what's changed. So what impact is this having on students and staff? This is a hugely difficult time for everyone. And I'd imagine that student staff are among the most hardest hit from it. So what are we seeing? Much more pressure, much more difficulty. What are you seeing? What impact is that having? How is that impact being mitigated? Yeah, high workloads, affecting business as usual. Yeah, and I'm sure many of us are finding it, especially if you've got kids, it's not easy to work from home and keep up with those workloads. Having to make rapid decisions that don't accommodate everyone, of course, so things have to happen really quickly and you can't deal with all those different edge cases, making sure everyone's treated equally, and that must be really challenging. Yeah, new technology. We've all experienced that, having to work online and getting adjusted to stuff and seen some of the various difficulties that people around the world have been having with video conferencing, etc. And that obviously learning while you're feeling busy is one of the most stressful things, but seeing it taking more time to do something which you think should take a shorter period of time is obviously adds to that stress. Unsuitable devices, I think that's a really key one. People not having the right level of devices, not having the right level of connectivity, that must be really challenging. I know some colleges, universities have been sending out laptops to people. I know some people have been trying to get tech firms to help with supplying equipment, but we know that there are people who are missing out from this. What's we got? Monitoring of staff and students working is a priority. That's interesting to know. So monitoring is always one of those words that brings alarm bells. So when you mean monitoring of staff and students working, do you mean checking that they are working, or do you mean checking that they're happy and effective and So I think there's some interesting things there that could be expanded a bit more. Interesting. So increasing requests for contact. That's really interesting. And that's more contact during this time from Mike there. Yeah, digital inequality, stress for staff. I mean, that's coming through very strongly. I mean, has anyone got any ideas, any things from their institutions which is helping with these levels of stress? Things which have been useful, things which have been helpful. Yeah, interesting point there. Universities can be more agile in changing assessment modes than colleges, which are tied to national awarding bodies and other tighter restrictions. Daily online coffee breaks, that's interesting. So daily online coffee breaks is a way of socialising and making sure people are in contact. That's an interesting one. It's something we've been doing in Jisc. We've been having virtual lunches together, which always leads to some awkwardness as to whether you should eat on camera or just duck off and have a bite. But it's really helpful just for keeping in touch. That's interesting. Interesting to hear from Samantha saying that it's resulted in putting more effort, more thought into assessment design rather than relying on synchronous individuated assessment. So a push for greater innovation, greater thought, maybe, which is quite an interesting thing. Yeah, Kath there, lots of creativity and new ways of bringing humans together. We've seen a real outpouring of that creativity from the education sector. It's been amazing how innovative people in universities and colleges have been during this period. Students are the other way, so staff being bombarded with requests for contact, Mike said, but after I say the students have said that they're being bombarded with comms to institutions. So feeling bombarded on each side. The people almost, we certainly had that in the early days of this at Jisc. We had communication, which is great, but sometimes it feels like over communication. You know, I'm getting so much, what do I process? And that takes a while to adjust and find the right levels. Yeah, I mean, the Mayor's made a great point here about low-income, wide-income participation students who might only have headspace to study and sit exams when away from home. And of course, there is no away from home at the moment. So some people are being affected hugely by it. Yeah, someone pointed out that if I'm not reading out your comments, it may be because there's so many, or it may be because I'm incompetent, or it may be because if you're pasting it to all panelists, you're sending a message to all panelists, then maybe that's not coming through to everyone. I think I may be reading out some comments which you can't see, I guess. Maybe that's what it is, but some are coming just to the panelists rather than to all panelists and attendees. So if you could make sure in the drop-down box above where you're typing your message, you selected all panelists and attendees, and everyone can see your comments. Otherwise, it's just good stuff for me, and I feel seems a bit like coding. Pub quiz seems a gentle way to introduce staff to methods of online learning. So that's a nice thing. Socially, there's been a massive upsurge in quizzing. Britain's always been a quiz nation, but maybe we're going to become a quiz superpower. After this, we're going to have quizzing that people are getting on. But I'd really like that as a tip to introduce people to online learning. Okay, so many comments. I'm not going to be able to get through all of them. Apologies about me not noticing before that I was reading out comments that are only coming to me. But if you could all make sure you select that all panelists and attendees, and then we'll make sure everyone sees them. You could have assumed I was making them up, of course, just to keep things going. But I can assure you, I'm not that creative. So I think that's really rich. Apologies if I can't get to every comment, but there's obviously a lot coming in and there's only so many I can get through. Again, just to encourage, if anyone wants to have a break for a different voice, if you put your hands up and we can give you the voice mic to reflect on some of the things you're learning or to expand on any of your comments. Okay, but moving on now to question three. Question three, the key question I think we've been reflecting mostly about in Jisc is there's lots of changes being made for now, but when and maybe even if lockdown gets relaxed and we go back to some semblance of normality, what's just going to revert back to the way it was instantly, or what's going to persist? Be really interested to hear from you. What do you think? Which of these changes do you think will last? questions get more difficult as you go along, so there might be that pause while you all think and get ready to type in your response. So I'll try my best to fill it till we get the good comments come rolling in. Okay, here we go. Confidence that change is possible. That's an interesting one. If we reflect back on the responses from DigiFest over why change might not happen, this has obviously been a huge, massive, unwelcome laboratory, but it has proved that change can happen in a relatively short period of time. We just have to make sure that we change the right things, and we make sure we think about all of those edge cases that are perhaps left behind during this mad change that's been going on. Interesting from Maya there, all lectures and workshops will need to be enabled live for remote participation. So that'll be a standard expectation that people can join remotely rather than just face-to-face being the expected norm. Vicky talking about staff discovering new tools they would want to continue using. So being forced to experiment and get on some of these new tools, actually getting experience with them, and then maybe finding them actually quite good and be used in a number of different ways. Someone from Debbie saying that professional body exams will just go straight back. Debbie's not sure. I think it's they asking people agree. That seems to me, certainly in the short term, but it'd be interesting to see whether any lessons from the pandemic will be transferred to perhaps slower long-term changes there. So Aftab saying that colleagues and students will adopt and experiment with new technologies more readily. That's interesting. Once the impetus, the immediate need to experiment with some of these remote tools has gone, will that leave a lasting habit of experimenting and wanting to use them, or will it just be, oh, thank God, let's just go back. Let's not use those things again. I think that's a really interesting one. I could see people going either way. So really interesting one from Shane there. Hopefully less emphasis on knowledge recall and more regard for the application of learning in practice and across contexts. Certainly things like capstone assessments seem to be heading in that direction, where you're extracting knowledge from a number of different modules learned and applying it in a different situation. I would have loved the assessments to be more like that when I was at university. It'd be interesting to see whether, and I would be interested to see whether that is something that sustains. Vicky's made it just a question there, future exams. Yes, I think it depends on the exams, I guess. GCSEs, A-levels, it seems hard to imagine those not doing anything other than just going back to normal. But colleges, universities, who knows? I think anything with awarding bodies involved, as people have said, they'll probably just revert straight back. But where there's a bit more freedom, then we might see some real changes. That's an interesting point from Amanda, that a lot of the preparation hard work that people have done in this period will be reusable. It won't just be for the pandemic, it can be repurposed and reusable for future classes. That's a very interesting one for Mike. My worry is more of the changes than they should will last. Senior managers thinking, ooh, distance learning is not that hard after all, when what we've actually been doing is goodwill. So we've been getting by on people saying it's a pandemic, we'll make the best of what we can, we'll make do amend, all those kind of good attitudes in university. But people thinking that's actually good, that's good enough. But then when we get back and finding that actually that's not going to satisfy people, that's really interesting. Yeah, so yeah, Debbie, following on to that, much is amateurish at the moment. Will students really pay £9,000 for what they're getting at the moment in the pandemic once the pandemic has disappeared? Okay, I'm aware of time. So will anything happen to learning lab skills from Maya? Another interesting one. There is one of my roles is working with startups in Jisc, and there's an interesting startup called Labster. I think that's the one, which does do virtual laboratory experiments. So there are startups experimenting with that, and I wonder how. I haven't heard much about that at all, so it'd be interesting to see what interesting things people are doing around lab skills. Right, I'm aware I can't cover anywhere near as much of these as I'd like to. Oh yeah, NK Denny saying more digital learning for opportunity for cost savings. I think that goes back to Mike's point about senior managers and their response to the pandemic, and again an area which needs to be treated carefully. Message is really flooding in now, so I'm well behind. So rather than catch up. I think we're going to move on to the next question, and maybe again, if people want to reflect on any of this or highlight anything that I've missed that's really crucial, which is bound to happen, either just colleagues step in to say something, or please again put your hand up and we'll give you the mic. So moving on to the question 4. What one thing would have made it easier to cope with assessment changes due to the pandemic? So if we could have put something in place last year, January even, 2 years ago, that would have made our lives much easier in the refactoring assessment that's gone on, what would that be? As I said, the question's getting harder now. So I expect a bit of a gap. Interesting point from Debbie there. Good leadership, informed about technology. That's gonna help in universities and colleges, that leadership will be more familiar with technology and its central importance and its possibilities. So Amanda, I think this is a response to the question 4. So planning for creative approaches to online assessments. So taking that opportunity, presumably, to take a step back and think, how can we do assessment differently? Always difficult to find those times that dive for a bit of scenario planning or a bit of discussion of what could be done differently, but it's now looking like that sort of thing may be something we make more time for now we've seen the possibilities that can happen. Ongoing distributed assessment based on coursework. Staff have regular training and peer review. RE assessment design, that's a really interesting one. I wonder if we'll see that more as staff. Anyone who works in Jisc, anyone who works with technology knows full how important training is, how important things like digital capability that Sarah and her team work on is. So it'd be interesting to see if that becomes something that's centrally important to universities and colleges after the pandemic. That's interesting from Aftab, and wishes the use of machine learning for formative and summative was more mature within the education sector. So Aftab there, but I wonder if you mean whether that, I guess you don't mean that which the technology was more mature. I guess you wish the use of the technology was more mature. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. So there's other industries which are doing much more with machine learning than education is, and the design of it, of course. Yeah. And now I wondered that machine learning is quite a divisive topic, and some people may be thinking actually education is right to go slow, right to take their time with it, because it's so important that we get it right, that we don't automate the wrong things, that we don't get rid of the most important parts of education. But there certainly, I think, is a case to be made that there is the opportunity to be going faster with machine learning, doing more with it. Wider culture of sharing best practice. That's interesting. I haven't had much of a sense of this in the pandemic. I don't know if it's led to more people saying, look what I'm doing. It certainly led to more people doing interesting things that you can follow and ape across all aspects of society. But I wonder if has it led to better sharing of learning? Will it lead to a change? I think that's a really interesting one. So Mike's talking about vibrant student-led communities. Now that's really interesting. Students, when we talk to students and work with them in things like startup competitions, they have a huge appetite for peer-to-peer solutions. It's one of their first things they go to. They look for their peers for support and help. And we're seeing more and more edtech startups trying to look at that area. So it'll be interesting to see what emerges out of that. Discord's a useful tool, obviously originally for video gaming, I believe. And students always have that love for tools which are theirs, as Mike says, rather than being corporate owned. So that's interesting that they've opened that up to people. Discord is free. I assume that Mike's encouraging people to use it. Better understanding about students' lives and tech they have to provide content and assessment in different ways. That's really interesting from Samantha, that we can't just assume everyone's got an up-to-date smartphone or an up-to-date laptop, has access to internet, can work in their house, as I think it was Mayo who said earlier. These basic assumptions, you can actually physically work from home in your home environment. All of these are things we'll need to understand a lot better. Another Discord found there, Becca. Learners engaging so much with it. It's really interesting that to see to go in where the learners are to Discord. They're already in there for the video games and going in there with them. There's always an interesting debate around that, whether students really want us in those places, want us as educators in those places, or whether we we make it fusty and uncool just by being in some of those places. So I think that's always been an interesting debate, and it'll be interesting to see how the pandemic changes that. Becca saying they invited you into those areas like it's like the wolves and vampires. You have to invite them in your house to let them in. So maybe you have to treat those spaces like that. Interesting. So Nick, so we've seen a lot of people saying, here's our content, it's free during lockdown, or here, have free access to our tool during the lockdown. Then the minute we're allowed out again, and bam, the paywalls come down, and all of a sudden stuff we've got used to, we spent time learning how to use, becomes unavailable to us. Maybe even the prices go up. I think that's going to be an interesting thing. Student digital experience, another good point. So designing and learning on that early in the field level, that's interesting. The staff are taking more interest in online assessment before it's mandated. Yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah, good. Simon making a really good point about maximising use of machine learning is that data is the foundation. You can't have machine learning if you don't have data to crunch. Machine learning needs data, or creator needs data. And unless universities and colleges have a good handle on their data layer, I think you can't use best use of machine learning. And I think when you look at AFTAB's work in Bolton College, that's one of the interesting things. The machine learning is great, but it relies on all data being joined up. And of course, ethical strategies, machine learning, making sure you are using that data wisely, you're using it with consent, you are using it for the right purposes to support the students, not to track or monitor them, or any of those dangerous words. Oh, really good point. And the areas which just aren't on, you just can't go there with that data, you just can't go into those areas. I think having those strategies is going to be something that is going to be really important if machine learning, AI is to take off within universities. Okay. 15 minutes left. I've got 3 more questions. We'll have to work through them a bit faster. Question 5. Bearing in mind the pandemic, what would you like the future of assessment to look like in a year's time? How about 5? I know it's difficult to think at the moment with the pandemic. It's very difficult to think beyond the next week, beyond the next food shop. It's very difficult to think sometimes, but we have to think, how is it going to change in a year? How is it going to change in 5 years? And my job is all about 3 years plus. I'm trying to think about that 5-year horizon and how we can prepare for it and what we can do. So Julie in there quickly, fewer exams, greater variety of assessment, greater use of online tools. So yeah, variety again coming from Amanda, not based on a single exam, so the end of those high stakes exams perhaps. No exams from Sarah, more authentic assessment. So Debbie saying in a year's time, authentic assessment, creative assessment, personalised assessment. Now that to me, that seems quite, in a year's time, are we really going to be able to do that? No, I hope we can. I hope Debbie's right there, because I think that would be exciting. But I wonder in a year's time how much change is really going to take place. Again, more creative, taking opportunities. Micro-credentials there from Ruth. Greater flexibility and choice of assessment for students. And that's really interesting. I was speaking to a director of learning at a university, and he was telling me that when students ask what they want for assessments, they always want to have a choice of how they take an assessment. The assessment here, I can choose whether to take an exam, whether I can take some coursework, whether I can do a presentation, and they would like that choice. But is that the right approach? Should we be giving students that level of choice? Debbie's saying maybe not in a year for that. So we'll put that in a 5-year bucket for now. Debbie, maybe 3. Let's compromise 3. Students start co-creation of assessment types and topics. That's interesting, getting students more involved in the process. Okay. With input from graduate employers, so Maya saying that we see employers having more of a stake in what assessments they want, because presumably in order to give them employees with the skills they need, so they don't have to spend time training them again once they become employees. That's a really interesting area, I think. We're seeing, again, startups going to go back to that. Quite a few interesting startups like Fourth Rev, that's Fourth as in FOURTHREV. Fourth Rev is about helping universities and businesses work together to create courses. I wonder if we'll see more of that kind of approach. Interesting there that it's not just about what we'd like to happen. There's always bigger forces at play. So Nick talking about the Conservative government unlikely to approve flexible assessment. And what would the Daily Mail say about more flexible assessment for exams? Sorry, one second, I'm just going to get a tissue for my nose. Sorry about that, I was so excited my nose started to dribble. Interesting. Mike's talking about ditching the essay, ditching the exam, and needing to enable students to create their assessment artifacts. So again, putting that creativity onto students. Shane talking about project-based, multiple capstones, interdisciplinary, again, across time, across context, multiple assessment stakeholders. I think that's really interesting. I don't know how many of you have seen one of the new institutions called the London Interdisciplinary School, which just gives you either a Bachelor of Arts and Science, that's the only degree you get from them. You don't get any subject. Instead, you just work on projects like MET has a project of helping solve knife crime. So you work on that and you learn different subjects you're working on that project. Is that approach going to become more widely used? Okay, bearing in mind time, I'm going to switch on. We spend a lot of time now, I suspect. Question 6. What do you think will prevent us getting to that future? So this future of greater flexibility, greater creativity, more capstone assessments, ditching the exam, ending the essay. What's going to prevent us from getting there? We already had the Daily Mail raised as a possible reason. Senior management right in there. Interesting that's again, senior management's not changing. This is still, when we talked about DigiFest pre the pandemic, that was right up there on top of reasons. It's coming in there being Joe right in there straight away with senior management as a reason. Some of our colleagues, again, so it's interesting, it's still the top reasons that are coming through pre-DigiFest. Interesting that the pandemic maybe hasn't changed some of those fundamental reasons. Quality assurance processes, root processes, I think the awarding bodies people were talking about earlier as well, some of those restrictions which could prevent some of these. That's really interesting, Vicky. Needing to cope with the fallout of everything else, preventing us from having the flood of messages. The one I was talking about disappeared off. Needing to cope with the fallout of everything else means there may not be the space to make changes long term. So dealing with student numbers falling, dealing with getting back to university, dealing with social distancing on campus may just mean that we don't have time to make any of these changes. The cleanup prevents any kind of innovation. That's an interesting perspective. And resources for marking assessments. Although everyone will be able to design resource-efficient marking rubrics would help. That's interesting. So machine learning in marking, that's one of the areas that people speculate may be able to take something off, but other people say that marking is vital. Marking feedback is a vital part of the process, and we shouldn't let the machines take that away. Assumptions about what being a teacher and a student means. Socialization, changing identities and roles. So that's societal change as a result of the pandemic, leading to issues, meaning we can't get some of the future that people have talked about. Correct support, that's often the thing. You can't just turn on a tool, turn on a magic edtech startup tool and expect change to happen. It's a long, arduous process of transformation, program support, and communication, which we require for any kind of change. Shared vision of what this measure will be like. That's a really interesting one, that sooner or later after the pandemic, someone's going to have to paint a picture of this is where we're going to end up. This is where we can be. This is what options have been open to us, or what options have been removed from us because of the pandemic. I think that visioning is going to be really important, and it'd be interesting to see when that starts to emerge, or if people have got good examples of it emerging already. Lack of skills and knowledge, not getting our assessment data ducks in a row. So this is something I personally agree with. It is something in the future assessment report that really real true transformation in assessment to reach some of the targets in the future assessment vision really requires that strong hold and management of all the information, the metadata, the full text data, the feedback data about assessment. I think that's vital for then doing any of the kind of interesting things people in technology would do. That has to be managed well. So I really agree with that point, Simon. Interesting. The alethiometer approach, interpreting machine learning, verifying machine learning grades. Mike, Alethiometer is obviously a reference to his dark materials, the Philip Pullman thing, where I think Lyra interprets a number of symbols and just knows what the answer is. I guess you're referring to machine learning, the kind of black box problem where a human can't follow the line of logic that machine learning process has been through to get to a particular answer, and that therefore how can we trust that answer if we don't know how it's got to? Yeah, it's like saying yes. So that's a really interesting point. I know a lot of people are working in research on that black box problem and how to make sure that logic is transparent and understandable. Data literacy from Ruth, that's another interesting one. And they are saying a student needs to follow how they've assessed as well. Absolutely, they have to have trust in the process. That's a really good point. They can't just have a magic machine assess them and say, you do all this grade. Imagine how frustrating that would be. Okay, last question, and then we're into the final few minutes. So, assessment literacy for students and staff from Lisa. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Amanda's been talking about coming up with creative forms of assessment. I think that requires a level of confidence and literacy. That's essential. Okay, final question. What is the one thing we can do to help us be prepared for the future of assessment? But this is a slight retread of the question about what was the one thing we could do to be prepared for the pandemic, but what is the one thing we need to do now that foundation? You've already heard my opinion in response to Simon's question. Get that data right. That's my one. That would be my one thing. There be compelling evidence base. That's interesting as well. I wonder how many people will mine the data and evidence from the pandemic to draw some conclusions from it. I wonder if that's possible, or if anyone's thinking about that at the moment. I'm sure much people are. Lots of case studies. Yeah, completely agree with that. Flexible learning design from evidence. A similar thing. Less on technology, more on the assessment design. Yeah, very good point. Technology's second or third in the list of things you have to do. You can't just leave it and say, ta-da, e-proctoring. Time and resources committed by senior management to explore this new approach. That's it. It says exploring as well as just managing it. The time to do that planning, the time to do that training, the time to do some brainstorming, sitting around a whiteboard, that kind of stuff, I should think. But Vicky encouraging people to be courageous rather than conservative. So maybe one thing about the pandemic, maybe one interpretation is it's opened our eyes to possibilities we didn't think were possible before, made some of the things we thought were impossible more possible. That could be one silver lining from it. Focus on pedagogy, not just technology. Again, very similar, I think, to Shane's point that you have to focus on that first, the design, the learning design, the pedagogy, everything like that has to happen first. Only then you layer in which technology suits that. But then Mark said technology. So I think, yeah, I think these are the things you have to focus on. You can't do one without the other, in my opinion. They have to go hand in hand in the right order. But with probably plenty of iteration, I should think, because you're not going to be able to plan it perfectly without trying it. More support top down for supporting data literacy for staff and students. Yeah, that'll be interesting. It will be really interesting to see how top down priorities change as a result of the pandemic. What's become more acceptable? What comes higher up the priority list? Interesting. So Vicky's saying that individuals may be emboldened and more courageous by their experience during the pandemic and what's possible, but the institutions may just be thinking, no, batten down the hatches. Let's get back to normal. Let's get back to ensuring we've got the student numbers, ensuring we've got the level of trust in our exam process, that we're in line with the awarding bodies, the professional bodies, etc. Yeah, I think Kath, good point. Making shared sense of the past few weeks. I think that's really, really important. I think that time for making sense, telling that story, extracting the meaning, extracting the evidence is going to be really vital. And yeah, I don't know how that's going to happen, but it's going to be interesting to see. Yeah, exactly. Lisa echoing that as well. Okay, I'm aware that we are nearly at time. We've got 10 minutes left, so that's the end of my questions. Really, thank you very much for everyone for engaging so energetically on the chat. There's a huge amount of interesting things in there. Thank you very much for that. We'll be able to share the chat afterwards. I don't know if we'll be able to do that, but we'll certainly be able to see from the recording. Apologies, you just got to listen to my voice exclusively from that. Man reads out tweets for an hour. I'm not sure if the David genres that will last, but I found that really interesting personally, and I thought there was a lot of interesting things coming out. Just want to close by plugging a couple of things to look from the future. So as I said, just released a report in February on the future assessment. If you haven't read that, I would obviously encourage you to go and read it. I think the 50 people we spoke to made for some really interesting content. There is a kind of a sister report that's coming out in May by a company called Emerge Education, who are edtech investors, by the QA and Jisc involved as well. And this will focus on responding to the pandemic in terms of assessment, what we can learn. It will include a market map of the edtech solutions out there and a maturity assessment of some of the edtech solutions out there. And it will also include some detail on planning for the longer term. So I think that report will be well worth looking at when it comes out in May. Probably May the 21st is the launch date, but that's still yet to be confirmed. The final thing is that just we're working on an idea in my team. We've got an early stage idea around helping students reflect on assessment feedback. So if that's an area you're interested in, please do get in touch with me. There's my details. We're really happy to hear from you and to involve you in that process. Just to note, obviously colleagues have already done that on the chat, but Debbie's point around anonymising the chat messages, so we'll do that if they're to be shared more widely. Sarah's put a link to the future assessment report. But that is it, unless anyone has any final questions. Okay, thanks, Simon. I've seen that, so I'll get in touch with you. If anyone has any final questions, I'm happy to answer them, but if not, I'll hand back to Sarah a few minutes early so you can have a little bit of a longer tea break.
Thank you, Andy. And just overwhelmed, I think, as you said, Andy, just by the wealth of comments that are being shared there. We will be saving the chat. I'm just checking with our events and our legal team whether we can actually circulate that chat wider in terms of the delegates. Obviously, you will have it in the recording, but obviously we will follow that up. But thank you. I think what's really interesting to see there, the pace at which things are changing, and that we're sort of on this cusp of seeing whether that change will continue, or whether, and I don't think we can go back to that normality of what we had before. So, we've been saying for so many years, and I know, as many of you have been, on that journey with us, that how do we get that transformative change in assessment? And Andy, your sort of future of assessment report, it's really couldn't have yet probably predicted the pace of change that we are seeing, which I think is really, really interesting. Andy, thank you so much. I know that you worked hard in that session with all those comments. If anyone does want to take the mic, please do let us know, if by just raising your hand or just popping a question in the chat panel for us. If not, we have now got our virtual tea and coffee break. We will be reconvening at, and I'll just get my slides up. Oh, sorry, we can actually see that. So we'll be back at 12 noon, and we'll be hearing from Rachel Forsyth from Manchester Metropolitan University around how they have been responding to supporting staff with transforming their practice with assessment and feedback over a number of years, but also what they have been doing more recently. So if there aren't any more questions, I will pause here. We will go and get our virtual tea and coffee break, and we'll reconvene at 12 noon. And Shri, are you happy to pause the recording? We are recording, and we will be making